Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today. We are pleased to bring you this webinar thanks to the kind sponsorship of Continued. I'm Fran Simon from Engagement Strategies, the producer of Early Childhood Investigations. We're really pleased to have you. I'm also pleased to welcome Barbara Kaiser, author, consultant, and social emotional learning expert, back to our webinar series. Her work and contributions to our field are always important, but never more than now during the challenges we face as a country today, and seemingly off and on throughout history. This webinar comes at a very pivotal point in a time when both early educators and young children are experiencing trauma on an unprecedented level. Both adults and children alike are expressing their heightened anxiety in unexpected ways. So Barbara steered the presentation to cover our shared experience with trauma and the impact on children and adults. Barbara, thank you so much for being here and being so responsive to the unfolding events. So welcome.
Well, thank you, Fran. Thank you for inviting me.
So happy to have you. We also want to welcome Jessica Lewis from Continued. Jessica, we are grateful for your ability to come join us today and for Continued sponsorship. So thank you so much for being here, and hello.
Hello, thank you. We're very excited to be here and sponsor this great webinar.
Great. This is a re-recorded version of the webinar presented on March 25th, 2020. Due to technical difficulties with the previous version of the recording, Barbara and Jessica agreed to come together again to create a fresh, error-free recording. Because we have no audience, the instructions are abbreviated, but please heed the following instructions. And we'll go quickly, everybody. Oops, my computer is, come on, computer. There we go. So I want to just remind you, as we always do in our webinars, that the instructions about how to download your certificate will be announced at the end of the webinar. Please stay on until the very last slide so you can get the link you need to download the certificate. We do love, admire, and respect you, but we are no longer responding to email about certificates. We'd really like to do that, but there are so many emails coming in, it really overwhelms us. There's only 2 of us managing this webinar series, and it would be really great to be able to get you to do this on your own. We have hundreds of thousands of people who have already done this, gotten their certificates, so I know you can do it. Okay, if you need more, if you want to find the slides related to today's session, you can find them on the recordings page of our site, and the URL is ecewebinars.com/recordings. And those are there all the time. So now without further ado, let's welcome Barbara. I'm going to turn the controls over to you, Barbara, right now. Here you go.
Okay.
Oh, Barbara, I forgot to introduce you. I apologize for that. Let me go back. I'm going to take back the controls and do that. That would have been nice, right? Such things I do. So finally, I'm pleased to introduce Barbara Kaiser. Barbara is the co-author of Challenging Behavior in Young Children, 4th edition, published in 2017, and Challenging Behavior in Elementary and Middle School. She and her co-author, Judy Rasminsky, are presently working on a new text for early childhood administrators that will be published by NAYC, supporting children, families, and staff when they are as a child with challenging behavior at the center. She's taught at Acadia University in Wolfville, Nova Scotia, and at Concordia University and College Marie Victoire in Montreal, Canada. In addition to presenting workshops and keynote speeches on challenging behavior throughout the United States, Canada, Australia, Singapore, and Europe, Barbara has acted as the chief consultant for Facing the Challenge, an instructional DVD based on the challenging behavior in young children, published by Devereaux Center for Resilient Children, and a workshop, What Do You Do with the Mad That You Feel, for Mr. Rogers Communications. She's also consulted for several regional projects and developed a series of webinars and a guidebook addressing bullying behavior for the Nova Scotia Department of Education, and designed a comprehensive intervention to address and prevent violence among young children ages 5 to 15. Continued also offers several of Barbara's great courses on challenging behavior. Over a period of 25 years, Barbara founded and was the director of 2 childcare centers and an after-school program. A master's degree in educational administration from McGill University gives her a firm theoretical foundation, but above all, her perspective is practical, realistic, and compassionate, stemming from decades of working with actual children, families, and teachers in real situations. So without further ado this time, now I really am going to turn the controls over to Barbara. So there you go, Barbara.
Okay. Show my screen. Okay. Get rid of that. Whoops. Sorry. Okay.
Here we
So,
go.
Hi, everyone. I'm really glad that we're able to do this again, and hopefully all will work out well. I have to say, I never would have imagined that I'd be presenting this webinar during a time when basically everyone is experiencing some level of stress. And for many of us, it may even have reached the level of traumatic, toxic stress, as we are all struggling to redefine what's normal. As Fran mentioned, originally this webinar focused primarily on children and the impact of stress on their behavior. But I have reworked it so that you can better understand the impact of stress on your behavior and attitudes, and how it is affecting your children if you're at home with them, the children you work with, and even your partner or spouse if you live with someone, as well as understanding toxic stress and children's behavior. The objectives for today are understanding what trauma is, how it affects you, the effects of trauma on children's brain development, how trauma impacts a child's behavior and ability to learn and play, and how you can effectively prevent and respond to challenging behavior. But before we begin, given the situation, I think it's important to stop and think about how you are feeling and the changes in your behavior as this pandemic continues. And the reason I'm asking you this is because if you can get in touch with your feelings and what you need right now to feel safe and secure, it will really help you to understand the children and the families that you're working with, your own child as well, who have experienced traumas in the past and who may be experiencing them right now, and what their feelings and behavior are all about, and what they need, because they need very much what you're needing right now as well. In addition to concerns about your health and the health of your loved ones, and you worry about having enough food and supplies at home right now. If your center is closed, you're undoubtedly wondering about how this will affect you financially. If your center is open, you may be thinking about whether or not you're vulnerable and open to contamination. And if you are working, even working from home, and your own child's school is closed, you may be facing issues such as who will take care of the kids, or how do I get everything done with all these kids running around, and I need to meet his needs or her needs, and I need to make lunch and all of those things. This stress is very real. The question is, what can you do about it? And the more you understand the impact of toxic and sustainable stress, the better you will be able to find ways to counteract its negative effects on your life. I think we need to begin by really defining what trauma is. A trauma is a psychologically distressing event that is outside the range of normal experience and involves a sense of intense fear and helplessness. It can be any event that undermines yours or a child's sense of physical or emotional safety, or poses a threat to the safety of those you love. And I think if you stop and think about it, today's pandemic qualifies in many ways. It's important to really recognize your own stress. Can you relate to any of these changes in your behavior as you look at this slide? When something like the global impact of the coronavirus and its consequences occur, Are you becoming sort of tired and wired at the same time? Are you suddenly much more jumpy, reacting to sounds you never used to react to? Do you find that you are inexplicably irritable? I know that sometimes I'm getting that a little bit. Are you unable to focus or concentrate the way you'd like to? Do you feel safe? And I think one of the things that all of us feel, especially those of us who take care of others, is that we feel guilty about not doing enough. So we really need to look at these stress factors and recognize that this is stress. Okay, this is what I am feeling. This is how I am reacting. And now what can I do about it? And those of us who have experienced trauma previously in our lives are at greater risk. But you need to realize you're not only dealing with how serious this pandemic is, but also the uncertainty of what the long-term consequences may be and how long it's going to be before things return to what we all know is normal. Needless to say, this makes it very hard for us to focus, self-regulate, and be our best. If you are around children, either at a center or at home, you will realize that they are picking up on your feelings. And therefore, it is very important for us to be powerfully present, emotionally responsive, and a role model of healthy social emotional behavior more than ever before. In addition, what adds to our difficulty perhaps in dealing with some of this situation in particular is that research has shown that there is a very high rate of stress in the field of early childhood anyway. So many educators are young and struggling financially and don't have the life experience or resources to cope with the challenges they face in both their professional and personal lives. And when stressed, a child's challenging behavior that pushes our buttons can make it even more difficult to respond effectively. Can you think of an incident in the past, or maybe even a day, when you were feeling stressed and you came to work, but you found that your response to a child's behavior actually escalated the behavior because you were not in a positive frame of mind and you felt overwhelmed? I think it's happened to all of us. In addition, it's not uncommon for educators who deal with traumatized children to develop their symptoms of traumatic stress. Coping with the effects of others' trauma can be draining and can have lasting negative effects. This is known as secondary traumatic stress, and I don't think a lot of us are aware of that. Because it involves so many powerful emotions, working with children with challenging behavior, and especially those who've experienced trauma, is probably the most stressful aspect of the teaching profession. And there may be times when you become totally overwhelmed and traumatized by this difficult work. This condition actually has several names. It's known as secondary traumatic stress, vicarious trauma, and also called compassion fatigue. In some ways, the symptoms of secondary trauma mimic those of post-traumatic stress disorder, such as, if you look at these, and I highlighted the ones that I think we're most likely to feel, feeling sort of withdrawing from friends and family, feeling helpless or isolated, or guilty, again, about not doing enough. So similar to stress, losing self-confidence and feeling incompetent. And sometimes we end up actually avoiding those children who've experienced trauma or worrying continually about them because we know when they go home what they might be facing. Since many of the symptoms are so similar, you may know that you're feeling exceptionally stressed and exhausted, but you don't always realize that your symptoms are a common reaction to working with children who've experienced stress and not necessarily always the stress in your own life. But you can protect against and manage your stress as well as secondary traumatic stress by practicing self-care through regular exercise, a healthy diet, and sufficient sleep. Activities such as yoga or meditation can be helpful in reducing general stress. It's important for you to take time away from those stress-inducing situations. Spend time with family or friends, or focusing on a project or hobby that can help guard against work becoming the only activity that defines who you are. Take care of yourself by engaging in enjoyable activities, finding time to self-reflect, allowing yourself to cry, and finding things to laugh about. And I think finding things to laugh about right now is so key. As we all know, working with young children requires us to be at the top of our game. Connecting with all of our personal resources is not easy, but becomes more important in times like this when challenging behavior occurs. because it starts with you. Your most valuable asset is your ability to stay calm and regulated, to manage your internal emotional state, and at the same time to remain emotionally available to the child. As Sarah Gilliam, who is the editor-in-chief of Exchange magazine, wrote, "You can model working through distressing situations with positive attitudes and flexibility. It's inevitable that you are going to have moments of anxiety or sadness in the coming days and weeks. We do not need to shelter our children from our true feelings, but we do need to show how we unpack these feelings and care for ourselves. This state of mind reassures the child that it's okay to have strong emotions and they won't scare you away or change your relationship. In addition, it will prevent your fear, distress, anger, frustration, whatever it is you might be feeling, from triggering a child's stress response and intensifying his or her challenging behavior. You will be role modeling how to tolerate uneasy feelings and eventually take charge of yourself." I've added this slide because I think people really are asking for this type of information so that you can see that every child has a different capacity to understand and cope with the circumstances surrounding COVID-19. It's important that we meet them at their own level with information that is understandable, helpful, and not too overwhelming or frightening. For toddlers and preschoolers, this means focusing on washing hands because that's something they can really do. And early elementary children are at a point where they can understand how diseases spread and the importance of hygiene and social distancing. Set up virtual play dates with friends via FaceTime, Facebook, Messenger, Kids, Zoom, whatever you have, because your kids miss their friends just as much as you do. Spend extra time playing with your children. Understand that play is how they process their world and problem solve. Don't be surprised to see themes of illness, doctor visits, even isolation. Help your child to find a place and have a place in your home where he or she can go to retreat when they're feeling stressed. You can make this place cozy by putting in blankets or pillows and cushions. I know my daughter created, because my grandson is in love with, he's going to be a fireman. So she created a fire station for him to go to, and they built one. Built a fire station that he can go and be in when he feels he just needs to be alone. It's good to know that even when you are on top of each other, you have your own special place to go to be alone. Expect behavioral issues, but respond gently. Children rely on routines constructed by others to make them feel safe and to know what comes next. So expect increased anxiety and worries. Don't introduce new behavioral plans or consequences, but focus on emotional connections. Follow their lead through physical touch, through play, and verbal reassurances that you will be there for them. But I think one of the most important things is keep news and alarming conversations out of the earshot from children. They see and hear everything and become very frightened by what they hear. Sarah Gilliam reminds us that there will be moments of charming connection and moments of abject misery. Keep your expectations reasonable for yourself, the other adults in your home, and most of all, your children. They're confused too. Just like you, they miss their friends, their teachers, their routines. Now, more than ever, we're all in this together. So try and look at this, go outside, run with them. Probably if they've been in childcare, they go outside every day. It's an important piece of the routine to maintain. The capacity to be resilient is an important factor in your ability to do this. And being resilient doesn't mean that you don't experience stress, emotional upheaval, and suffering. It's your ability to withstand adversity, bounce back, and grow despite life's downturns. I've heard about it being compared to climbing a mountain without a trail map. It takes time, strength, and help from people around you. And you'll probably experience setbacks. And I know for me, I'm probably going to go in the wrong direction several times along the way. But eventually, you'll reach the top and look back at how far you've come. Demonstrating resilience includes working through emotional pain and suffering. Resilience is not something you're either born with or not. It is found in a variety of behaviors, thoughts, and actions. It's a dynamic process, and it can be developed throughout your lifespan. Building your resilience is as I mentioned, developmental. It takes place over time. It involves a combination of inner strengths and outer resources. And there isn't a universal formula for becoming more resilient. There's not one way that all of us can do it. All people are different. Know your sources of stress and frustration and identify the unhealthy ways you are currently coping with stress so you can find healthier stress management strategies that best fit your personality. For me, it's all about jelly beans and chocolate, which I'm really trying to work on. Factors that help build your resilience include having someone you can talk to, which is so important. Do you have someone in your life that you can talk to that won't judge you, but will listen, will understand, and maybe provide the feedback that you need? It's important to have a clear sense of yourself and your strengths. All too often, people in our profession are so aware of what we don't do well and what we should be doing better instead of what we are doing well. While individuals process trauma and adversity in different ways, there's certain protective factors that you can tap into to help build your resilience by improving coping skills and adaptability. In other words, resilience isn't something people tap into only during overwhelming moments or adversity or times like this. It builds as people encounter all kinds of stressors on a daily basis. Life is not stress-free. And recognize and focus on the protective factors that can be nurtured. And here's a list of some of them. Experts have suggested it will help us to cope with today's world if we stick to a routine, get showered and dressed in comfortable clothes right now, and put on something bright, put on something you like to wear. It's amazing how dress can impact our mood. Get out at least once a day. If you don't feel comfortable going outside, there are many things that you can do to get exercise, like YouTube videos about movement classes, yoga. Reach out to others. Once again, as much as your kids need it, you do too. FaceTime, Skype, make phone calls, connect with the people you want to seek and provide support. A lot of cooped up time can bring out the worst in everyone. Everyone is doing the best they can to make it through this. So if you are living with others, take deep breaths in a moment before responding to their anxiety. We're living with the unprecedented demand of meeting work deadlines, running a sterile household, and dealing with confinement. Focus on strengthening your connection through time spent together. Limit the news for yourself as well as your children, as well as COVID conversations all the time. Counterbalance the heavy information with hopeful information. There are a lot of great stories out there of people sacrificing, donating, and supporting one another. Share those. Now's the time maybe that you can use to do something you never felt you had the time to do, whether it's cleaning out your closets or start painting or knitting or baking. If you are having difficulty coping, seek out help. Don't be embarrassed. There are mental health people on the ready to help you through this crisis. And remind yourself daily that this is temporary. Although it doesn't seem that way right now, this is very scary and it's going to go on for an undetermined amount of time, but it will end. And most important of all, find the lesson. What can each of us learn in big and small ways from this crisis? What needs to change in ourselves, our homes, our communities, our nation, and our world? If we take a breath and think about that, when this is over, can we go back to a better world? Needless to say, the more resilient you are, the better equipped you will be to face challenges. The hard part for most of us is the idea that we need to take care of ourselves before we can take care of others. We must begin to think about how we can be the best examples of resilience, not only for ourselves, but for our children and for those we work and live with. The Devereaux Center for Resilient Children strongly believes that before we can support the resilience of others, we must resolve to examine our own level of resilience. But we also need to remember that childcare centers, preschools, and schools are designed to provide children with safe environments to learn, grow, and develop. Unfortunately, many children, even before this crisis, arrive carrying an overwhelming burden, which, if not understood and managed, impairs their capacity to learn and to benefit from the rich possibilities that the environment can provide. Some of these experiences, like surviving a tornado, a fire, a flood, or arriving as a refugee are obviously traumatic. However, you may not realize that a child who seems to have it all could also be traumatized and living with family violence or substance abuse that's hidden from view. Toxic exposure is a daily fact of life for nearly 5 million American children and families living in homelessness, a number that I still have a very hard time even thinking about in today's world and in the United States. If you extend that to include all children living in poverty and children who are exposed to violence through media, current events, and families in crisis, from work stress, domestic violence, divorce, and more, the numbers are staggering, and the impact on the next generation is profound. So the more you know about it and how it affects a child's behavior, the more prepared you will be to provide support to that child when challenging behavior occurs. I think it's very important to remember that stress is not always detrimental. We all need to learn how to deal with stress. When a child is crying in their crib, you don't go there right away. They might spend a few moments trying to figure out what are they going to do. There are times when they just can't, a preschooler can't get it right, and it's somewhat stressful. Learning to deal with that stress is a normal part of healthy development. But there is an important difference between the stresses of everyday life, which can build resilience, and toxic stress. Positive stress is mild or brief, and a supportive adult can help a child get through it, adapt, and gain a sense of mastery and control. And tolerable stress does have the potential to harm. However, usually there is what makes the difference actually between tolerable and toxic is that there's an adult who can buffer its effects and enable the child to cope and teach them the skills they might need. But toxic stress is different. In fact, in 2012, the American Academy of Pediatrics issued a landmark warning that toxic stress could harm children for life. What makes toxic stress so dangerous? Well, first, the adverse events that evoke the young child's stress system are intense, frequent, sizable, and prolonged. Second, there are no adults to protect and support the child through the experience. And finally, the stress response system zooms into such high gear for such an extended period of time that it never recovers. Instead, it reprograms itself, turning it on because it becomes much easier, and turning it off becomes much harder for the child. The child develops abnormal cortisol patterns, and sometimes the system seems to shut down almost entirely. The damage that has been done by separating children crossing the southern border of the United States from their families is actually unimaginable. But there are a number of risk factors that influence children's development and behavior, and it's not limited to just trauma. So I wanted to just put this slide up to remind people there are many things that children are affected by, including before they're born, the intrauterine environment during pregnancy, like maternal nutrition or stress or even substance abuse. And things such as genetic makeup or temperament, health issues, or physical or cognitive disabilities. And there are other environmental risk factors as well. But exposure to violence, especially to trauma, is an important risk factor for challenging behavior. It has become the subject of intense interest since the appearance of a massive public health study of adverse childhood experiences, which I'm sure many of you have heard about, otherwise known as ACEs, of 17,000 average Americans carried out by the Centers for Disease Control and Kaiser Permanente. The ACEs study shows that adverse childhood experiences have a tremendous impact not only when a person is young, but also throughout their lives. If you look at this diagram, it begins when we're young, and it's a whole life perspective. The more ACEs children experience, the greater their risk for social, emotional, and cognitive delays. And according to the 2016 National Survey of Children's Health, just under half of children in the United States have experienced at least one adverse childhood experience, and 1 in 10 children have experienced 3 or more, which puts them at a very high risk for trauma's effects. The negative experiences that happen in the early years can even lead to early death. I just put this graphic up because it really, I thought, was a good way, because some of us are visual learners, such as myself, and it shows that ACEs include childhood traumas such as neglect, psychological, physical, or social sexual abuse, and family dysfunction in the form of an alcoholic or mentally ill parent, domestic violence, the incarceration of family members, the loss of a parent through abandonment, divorce, or separation, and witnessing or experiencing family or community violence or war. A study of young children found that by the age of 3, 1 in 4 experienced or witnessed potentially traumatic events at the rate that doubled for children living in poverty. The extent to which a child is affected by trauma is dependent on the many cascading complex factors, including the age and developmental stage of the child, the nature of the trauma, whether or not it's a one-off event or a persistent part of life, whether it involves harm caused by another person or a natural disaster, and whether there are caring, protective adults available to comfort and support the child before, during, and after the trauma. The presence of a supportive adult is central to an experience being tolerable rather than toxic. Many children who experience trauma do not have the benefit of an adult to scaffold them. There are many types of trauma. The key word is perception. We do not all experience life events in the same way. Some people are stronger, more resilient than others. But if a child feels unsafe, whether it is the result of a single event or repeated events over time, even a result of genetic changes due to historical trauma, it has the same effect. Today's pandemic is probably at the acute stage, if you look at this slide, but it can become complex and has the potential to even become historical trauma. So let's take a look at some of these types of traumatic events. Domestic violence may be the most commonly experienced trauma. It permeates children's lives in a myriad of ways. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention has reported that in homes where violence between partners occur, there can be a 60% chance of co-occurring child abuse. The psychological aftermath of exposure to domestic violence can include fear of harm or abandonment, excessive worry or sadness, guilt, inability to experience empathy, habitual lying, low frustration tolerance, emotional distancing, poor judgment, shame, and fear about the future. What we need to realize is that family violence and domestic abuse and domestic violence is not just one thing. Sometimes it can be just hearing or observing an act of violence. Sometimes it's living in an atmosphere of overwhelming fear and stress. Sometimes locking a child in a room can become a traumatic event, or observing injuries in the aftermath of an assault, and then having to feel that it's their responsibility to call police or the ambulance or other sources of help, which some children have done. Sarah Thompson, the director of U.S. Emergencies for Save the Children, notes that although each child experiences a disaster differently, and we have to be careful about making assumptions about trauma, it is clear that disasters radically impact a child's life and future. Children process these events with a limited understanding, and they may be more fearful of returning to school or childcare and have difficulty separating. They may exhibit some regressive behavior. They may be more aggressive or withdrawn and tend to cry, become more easily upset as a result of these experiences. The impact may not appear immediately. So it's important to recognize changes in behavior even months or years after disaster, because recovering from a disaster is a long process. So when we all come back to work and the kids come back to childcare, it's very important to remember that some of them may be carrying some of this stress with them and others may not. So we have to be aware of how this pandemic may have affected the children when they return to daycare or school. Or if you live in a community that's experienced other disasters and the kids came back and they seem just fine, it's possible 3 weeks from then, 2 months from then, it will all happen and they'll start to regress, they'll start to respond to the trauma that they had experienced. I want to be clear that poverty in itself is not going to guarantee a traumatic, stressful experience. However, it is considered an adverse childhood experience. But as with all parents and with everything in life, An important factor is resilience and the ability of the family to confront and deal with the problems they face as a result of poverty. However, some children living in poverty are at greater risk if there's no adult present to provide that support because they are so focused on creating and finding ways to deal with the stress they're facing because of food or housing shortages, health issues. And also often, if it is an undocumented family, they're afraid to seek the medical care they need. Children are also at risk of trauma as a result of homelessness, discrimination, foster care, bullying, repeated medical procedures, life-threatening illness, or the loss of a caregiver through deportation or migration. Do you know if you have any children who have at least one family member in prison in your group? Many of us don't even know, but when I have done conferences and workshops with large groups of people and asked this question, I have always been amazed at how many people, when I ask them, if you know you have a child who has at least one family member incarcerated, how many people stand up? I think what we need to recognize, if you do have a child, that you're not alone. And the more you understand about these children, the better. And if you can seek out support from your coworkers or other people at other centers, it's an important thing to talk about, because these children are more likely to experience a higher incidence of other stressful, potential traumatic events than their peers. They're more likely to underperform, to be less engaged, and to receive less attention from parents overall. And just imagine a situation where a preschooler, it's breakfast, he's sitting there, he's angry because he doesn't like the cereal been given. He throws it on the floor and his mother turns around to him. His father is incarcerated, turns around to him and says, "You're just like your father." How do you think that makes the child feel? We need to be sensitive to what these children may be going through and what they have gone through throughout that experience. In addition, a great many children suffer from racial or historical trauma, which is the emotional and psychological wounding transmitted from generation to generation, such as the slavery of African Americans, the murder and displacement of indigenous peoples, and the separation and deportation of non-documented immigrant families. Contemporary members of the affected group may actually experience trauma-related symptoms without having been present for that past traumatizing events. So even if the child was not part of any of those separation or displacement of their culture, they still may be dealing with that trauma. In these families, each successive generation carries the burdens of the past, whether consciously or unconsciously, and transmits this history in its stories, parenting style, and even by epigenetically marked genes, as it strives to protect its children by preparing them to deal with these still sometimes very real threats. Epigenetics is the study of biological mechanisms that actually switch genes on and off, and changes can be inherited. The different combinations of genes that are turned on or off is what makes each one of us unique and can influence our behavior and responses to events. This diagram illustrates how trauma is passed on from generation to generation. If it's not dealt with adequately in one generation, it gets passed down to the following generation. And historical trauma is more common when the trauma is deliberately inflicted, because it is much harder to recover from, as it undermines the cohesion and strengths of individuals, cultures, and communities. And this holds true for the Jewish people in Europe who were in concentration camps during World War II, and their generation, which is the following generation, which is really my generation, and even will be carried through to my children's generation. So it's very important to recognize that you can't always identify the cause of that trauma and know what some of those factors may be and some of the behaviors. Do you have a school safety drill? 42 states have laws requiring some sort of emergency or safety drill in schools and even childcare centers, many of which, or probably all of which, are designed to protect against active shooters or disasters, tornadoes, things that can happen while the children are at school or childcare. The drills give teachers and students a blueprint to follow during emergencies. They're important, but if your school or center practices these drills, you need to realize that even tame active shooter drills with plenty of warning can traumatize students. Some children are afraid to go to school in the days following the drill, but you can mitigate these effects. Lockdowns are important, but it's imperative to understand that for some children, there is a real perception of risk, even when absent, and that can have a real effect on their behavior. You can mitigate it by talking with the children, assuring them it's a drill, recognizing that even as a drill, it can be a trigger if they have experienced other traumatic events. And if the drill itself is creating anxiety, recognize it, stay close to that child, and even find something else for that child to do if you feel it would support and help them. They will appreciate the understanding, gently ease them into those practices, but don't force them to participate. The epigenetic process enables a child's genes to adapt to his or her life circumstances. Early environment and experience can chemically mark genes. A stressful environment can cause epigenetic changes in the present as well as through historical trauma that damage the stress response system, which is especially vulnerable to the effects of toxic stress. But there are a lot of protective factors that children who have experienced trauma, hopefully we can help develop. And a significant protective factor in the face of trauma is a secure attachment. Children who experience healthy attachments feel safe and secure, are eager to learn, have healthy self-awareness, and have empathy for and consideration of others. Often children who've experienced trauma haven't had the opportunity to develop a secure attachment to a caregiver, which is the basis for trust. And I have to say that if we go back to the natural disasters and what happens to families during natural disasters, creating a secure attachment may not be a consequence of whether or not a family loves their child. But for example, when Katrina occurred, families in Louisiana were looking for places to live. They were looking for food. They were looking for shelter. They couldn't find diapers. They hardly could find food. Their life was turned upside down. It was very hard for them to make it a priority to be there for their child at all times. And I was actually asked to come and do workshops with students at 4 years old in their preschools to help teachers understand how to support them because of the lack of attachment they had experienced. No one had consistently loved them or been able to respond to their needs. And in cases of families going through domestic violence, no one has been able to protect them and provide them with emotional support. No one has acted as a positive role model for them to look up to and learn and form. And as a result, they feel unloved, incompetent, ashamed. The attachment style developed in childhood has actually been shown to affect our own adult relationships when we get older, and who we choose as partners and how we deal with others. The important role of the adult in supporting any child, but especially a child who has experienced trauma, becomes obvious when we consider the fundamental principle of attachment theory, that human relationships drive human development. The establishment of a secure attachment relationship with a caregiver ensures the child is free to safely explore while maintaining a secure base. The pattern of exploration and return is often referred to as the circle of security. Children only feel free to explore if they know their attachment figure will watch over them to support and protect and enjoy them, and will be there on return to comfort, delight, and to organize their feelings and behavior when they go beyond their own limits of self-organization. And if you look at this and you see this is focused on the parent, but if you take a look at this diagram and think of your role as an early childhood educator, how can you provide this to kids who need it? How can you help them understand that you're there for them, you will protect them, you will comfort them, you will help them organize their feelings even when they're having a hard time? I can't repeat enough how important it is for you to understand that you can be that attachment figure. You can make all the difference in that child's life. All families love their children, but life circumstances such as substance abuse, family stress, poverty, depression, or single parenthood, and as I mentioned, disasters, interfere with this very important relationship. When the primary caregiver is unpredictable, unavailable, or rejecting, children form a different kind of attachment, which is called an insecure attachment. And they may become either demanding and clinging with a low tolerance for frustration, or actually self-sufficient beyond their years and unwilling to accept help or comfort. The child that needs you the most will do what he or she can do to push you away. So it's up to us to keep trying, but in a way that is not invasive. The importance of secure attachment for children with trauma cannot be overestimated. There is considerable evidence that a child's attachment experience mediates this trauma. Securely attached children are more able to be comforted and to reset to a non-fear-driven response. Children with attachment disorders need you the most are probably the hardest to like. I'm sure you've experienced that. They don't trust other people, have difficulty reading social cues, and forming relationships with peers and adults. They may even provoke negative feelings because they appear aloof or oppositional, because they don't trust others and they're sure you're going to reject them. So they reject you before you can reject them. Children with an insecure, ambivalent attachment see the world as a dangerous place and remain in a constant state of fear and anxiety, always in guard about possible threats. They're often preoccupied with these threats and can't concentrate on anything else. And as a consequence, they have trouble learning, paying attention, and processing and retrieving information. Language development, social emotional regulation, and the ability to control behavior are also damaged. These children are often seen as non-compliant, defiant, oppositional, or aggressive. So stop and think about it. Think about their needs and how you can make that difference. Children who have experienced trauma will form a disorganized attachment to their caregiver and become unpredictable, hypervigilant, see signs of rejection where none exists, and are highly reactive to cues in the environment. So as you can see, attachment and trauma are clearly linked. You need to focus on building your relationship instead of on the behavior. This won't be easy because these are the kids that will do anything they can to keep you at an emotional distance. There is a vast amount of emerging research and clinical evidence that has radically improved our understanding of the psychological, emotional, and physiological development of children and the way that trauma and neglect impact normal developmental processes. In particular, new technologies and concepts have allowed us to really learn a lot about the operation and development of the brain and have actually transformed our understanding of child development. It is now evident, for example, that experiences that occur at developmentally sensitive times interact to form and alter the very structure of the brain. Due to high number of people registered at this webinar, we've decided not to take the chance of showing this video that I wanted to show and creating potential problems. So below is the link, and I do suggest that you take a look at it after. There's a lot of wonderful information on the Harvard site for child development. The brain of a child who's experienced trauma is quick to perceive any reminder of it as a threat. A new person in the room, an unexpected sound, a harsh tone of voice, someone coming too close, whether or not it's actually threatening or whether or not the child is consciously aware of it. And this is why it's important to limit the number of people that come into your room, because you don't know how that will affect a child. A brain in this state is vulnerable to the poisonous effects of the hormone cortisol, which in large amounts may destroy neurons, keep new ones from growing, and dissolve the connections between them. The important thing to remember is that the brain of young children retain a high level of plasticity, and neural connections can be altered, and I keep saying this, with supportive relationships and consistent care. The brain knows exactly what to do in a dangerous situation. It instantly activates the stress system, sending the stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline, in to prepare us to fight, flee, or freeze. This is often known as an amygdala hijack. And as soon as the threat disappears, the stress system usually returns to normal. But when a threat or traumatic event is long-lasting or intensive, and there's no reliable adult around to help the child deal with it, the stress system resets itself to take over the job of defending the child at all hours of the day. As a result, it overloads the developing brain with toxic levels of cortisol that disrupt its architecture, impairs its functioning, and even affects a child's ability to play, which is hard because that's how children learn to handle life's problems. When a child's stress system is always on high alert, the child sees the world as a dangerous place, and challenging behavior becomes probably their only way in their mind of protecting themselves against any possible threat. According to Barbara Sorrells, when a child's fight, flight, freeze reaction kicks in, he doesn't have the capacity to think about what he's doing. He fears for his life and he just acts. If he's in fight mode, he becomes aggressive. He may scream, kick, bite, or throw himself on the floor. If he's in flight mode, he may hide under a table, cover himself with a blanket, or literally run out of the room. And a child in the freeze state, which is the most common response for infants and toddlers, is to totally space out. Does this remind you of a child that you've been working with? Because cortisol floods the brain of children who have experienced severe and chronic trauma, they may have a sudden inability to develop along normal trajectory for their age. They will probably experience poor memory recall, communication difficulties, and will often demonstrate regressive behaviors. The response may become magnified, such as shallow breathing, chronic pain, even clammy skin when they get stressed. They often disassociate and lose the ability to engage socially, have difficulty with eye contact, can become mute, and also have difficulty experiencing healthy relationships and understanding boundaries. Most children use a combination of hyperarousal and disassociation as a response to perceived threat. It's important to remember that this is the perception of the threat. It doesn't mean there is a threat that induces the response. The source of the threat can be internal, a feeling like anxiety or powerlessness, a thought such as, I'm alone, or an external threat, such as a verbal or physical cue that an adult is angry, or a sound or smell that reminds the child of trauma. You may never know what traumatic experience a child has been through, but it's important to understand how trauma can affect a child's behavior. And I thought this was an interesting slide to share with you, because if you take a look at it, you can see how trauma affects children's cognition, physical health, emotions, relationships, mental health, behavior, and brain development. It is very, very serious, but it also means that we can make a difference if we can find a way to help them develop their resilience and deal with some of the events that they're experiencing. See them as problems that they have learned how to solve, as ways in which they can perhaps become stronger. I thought this was just an interesting graphic to share with you, because a lot of us just jump to the opinion that children who are easily distracted, don't seem to listen, are disorganized, hyperactive, restless, are all ADD or ADHD. But there is a huge overlap with trauma. So we need to really look at the fact that maybe what we need to focus on is not so much, again, the behavior, but the relationship with the child and teaching the child alternative ways to meet their needs. Trauma has a cumulative effect on children's behavior. When children are infants, who have experienced trauma, they often fail to thrive and are difficult to soothe. They will resist contact. They'll push you away, and they don't easily respond to or are not interested in human stimulation. As they get older, they may have language delays, have frequent temper tantrums, remain withdrawn, and resist efforts to interact with, again, or be soothed. Separation, even at transitions, are hard because they are fearful that the person will not return. In addition, once again, when they are preschoolers who've been exposed to trauma, they may become hypervigilant, don't have a good sense of social relationships, and actually attach themselves indiscriminately to acquaintances or total strangers. They misinterpret facial expressions and body language in a negative way because they see things through the lens of shame and worthlessness. They struggle with strong emotions and they express anger and frustration through their bodies, becoming prone to unprovoked aggression, particularly in moments of emotional closeness. They don't trust that emotional closeness. They may also lack play skills, especially if the play involves symbols and language, such as dramatic play, and they try to control everyone and everything in their environment because it helps them to feel safe. So this is cumulative. It starts at infants, but it's not that once they're preschool, they become hypervigilant. This adds up. And this is what some children are actually dealing with on a daily basis. Early childhood trauma puts children at a greater risk for developing that social processing impairments that will later affect their social perception and their ability to interact with their peers and other, including their caregivers. Once a dysfunctional attachment pattern is formed in childhood, it can cause misperceptions of others' intentions and beliefs. Heightened threat vigilance can distract abuse victims from processing cognitive and social information, and the lack of stable, positive role models can interfere with their ability to recognize and respond to emotional cues. These are the children who will be sure they were pushed if someone bumps into them. Their automatic reaction to social stimuli is likely to be biased towards fear or hostility. Children can sometimes display poor social discrimination, leading to poor choices regarding social actions. You can support children in reappraising social situations by teaching and modeling the appropriate reactions to these social situations, conveying trust in other adults, modeling appropriate social interactions, and teaching social emotional skills not only to that child, but to all the children. And I am separating this, even though we have discussed many of these factors, just to connect it to how toxic stress and trauma relate to social information processing and executive function. Because if executive function helps children plan, organize, make decisions, shifts between situations or thoughts, control their emotions, and inhibit powerful responses so they can focus at the task at hand instead of engaging in traumas and aggressive behavior or even withdrawing from the group. It helps them to be flexible and move easily from one behavior to another in response to a changing environment. Children who have experienced trauma, however, have a short-term memory, and it might be difficult for them to remember what's being asked of them if you give them too many tasks at once. They have difficulty moving from one activity to another. And neuropsychological research suggests that children who have experienced neglect and physical abuse can experience problems in auditory attention and cognitive flexibility, both of which are required in problem solving and planning. And difficulty with cognitive flexibility means that these children may struggle with behavior that they need to adapt to suit different settings. Once again, to transition from task, to plan, and even to initiate or complete a task. So when we talk about executive function, when we talk about social processing, it's important to remember how trauma can interfere with this ability and the role that you can play instead of focusing on the behavior, but focusing on what you can do in building that trust. It's important to realize that in the same way, all of us, and children especially, don't know what they don't know. And children don't realize the impact of a traumatic environment could have on them, or maybe even the fact that other children have different lives and live in different circumstances. I think children think that basically what happens in their home happens in everyone's home. So often the behavior that you see is the behavior that they need in order to survive. And if you follow Michael Unger's theory of resilience, he really has made a point that, this could be their way of being resilient. Resilient can come in many forms. And if this is the way they need to survive, we need to help them feel safe so they can find other ways to survive and recognize that when they are with you, they are okay. You need to reframe your response, take a deep breath, and try to help the child to recognize they are safe as opposed to reacting to a manner that validates their response. In a recent Education Week poll, 25% of the teachers surveyed confessed that they had trouble finding ways to help children experiencing emotional or psychological distress or trauma because their behavior seemed so unpredictable and the strategies they were using with other children weren't working. They found themselves frustrated and angry, which made it even harder for them to effectively respond. While not all children who have behavior issues have been affected by trauma, creating a trauma-informed classroom can benefit all children by providing an environment that enables them to develop to their emotional, social, and intellectual potential. It's very important to recognize that trauma is not the only thing that defines a child. Every child has strengths, interests, and talents. Look for these islands of competence, is what they're called, and help the child who has experienced trauma and all the other children to find ways that they can participate in activities that they're good at, and recognize, especially for those children who've experienced trauma, that they can do something well, because most of those children are just aware of their shortcomings. We need to help them recognize who they are and how they can succeed. When you look at this poster, there's only one don't in this. Don't punish kids for behaviors that are trauma symptoms. That's an important factor in trauma-informed practice, because punishment, even if a child has not been traumatized, will damage your relationship with the child and probably make the child angry and more defiant. It undermines all children's sense of safety. It lowers their self-esteem, and especially for children who have been traumatized, it says to them, I must be bad. In addition, punishment does not help the child to understand the intense emotions that cause the undesirable behavior or teach the child new skills. For some of them, time out, time away, even redirection can be perceived as another rejection. A disturbing consequence, especially for children of domestic violence, is that it models the use of power, as opposed to reason or cooperation. Put simply, the child is learning that if you don't like the way someone is acting, if you just make that person feel bad until he gives in, he'll do what you want. Numerous scientific studies support the conclusion that dependable, supportive, and responsive interactions can prevent or reverse the damaging effects of toxic stress. It is the ongoing interactions with loving, emotionally responsive, and caring adults that bring about healing. And because you often spend more waking hours with the child than any other adult, you are all key players in that path to healing. But no matter what the risk factors in a child's life, behavior is a form of communication, and the best way to respond is to provide a safe and secure environment that helps the child to develop trust in you and his surroundings. With appropriate supports and interventions, children can develop the skills they need to overcome their trauma. When you are resilient and in control of your own feelings, you will be able to provide a secure base to buffer that stress, so that children who don't trust anyone can feel safe and protected, know their needs will be taken care of, learn to trust, realize that perhaps the world isn't such a bad place after all. Listen carefully and welcome all feelings. It is extremely important for children experiencing stress that you completely accept and reflect whatever feelings are surfacing. I think for us, the hardest thing is don't take things personally. It's not about you, it's about them. And if you can remove yourself, you can respond in a much more caring way and focus on the positive. All children need to feel heard and respected, which is just one example of the fact that the approaches you use to help children cope with stress are also effective ways of working with all children, because best practice is best practice. And remember that prevention is the best intervention. To be sure, you have opportunities for child-directed and free play. Play, especially dramatic play, helps children to make sense of the world, express and regulate their thoughts and feelings, and understand themselves as others. You can increase children's sense of control and mastery by letting them make choices, real choices. Offer a variety of activities. Give them a sense of control. Routines are important as they help create a sense of normalcy and safety. And being consistent and having that routine is so important to children who have been traumatized. And I'm sure as you stay home with your own children right now, you realize how important that routine is. When looking at the physical environment, it's important to note that research has shown that color, lighting, sound, and noise, even temperature of the room and the physical space, both vertically and horizontally, can increase cortisol levels over time and affect a child's stress level. I have to say that in my center years ago, we had rooms. We had the quiet room, the noisy room, and the kind of in-between room. And intelligently, we painted the quiet room's walls red and wondered why the kids were struggling. It took a while, but it dawned on us. We repainted it a peach color, and things seemed to change. Think about the lighting in the room as well. Think about the sound level. Sometimes we feel we have to always play children's music, but then we have to talk above it. Things get very loud. Can we have a quiet time? It's important to look at the room. Look at how many things are on the walls. Is it overstimulating? Children will be looking to you for how to react, especially in times of a crisis, which the COVID-19 certainly is. In times like this, it's important that you take the time to process your own feelings, fears, and losses, so that if you come back to work and the children start to play doctor or start to reenact what they understood on the level that they understood it about being isolated and the impact of the COVID-19, you have to let them do it. My sister, who lived in New York at the time of 9/11, her school was closed for a period of time right after it occurred. And when it came back, as the children were coming into the classroom, she was relieved to see them all coming one by one. And at one point, there was a little boy playing on the blocks. And when his friend arrived, he yelled across the room, "Stevie, come and play with me. I built the building, get the plane so we can knock it down." And my sister's knee-jerk reaction was, "No, not in my room, you won't." And when we talked about this, I said to her, they needed to do this. But she had been through this trauma herself. She wasn't really ready. We need to help them look at the positive side. And I suggested to her, look for the people who helped. Look for the ambulance drivers. Look for the police. Look for all the people that protected one another. Instead of get them to help them to understand the total picture. So once again, be sure that you have dealt with it for yourself before you're going to be able to really work with the children effectively. And you need to have a paradigm shift. Instead of seeing a disobedient, defiant, and angry child who needs to be disciplined, try to see a scared, anxious child who needs respect, kindness, and compassion, and whose development is probably far behind his or her chronological age if they have experienced previous trauma. And even if the COVID-19 has been a traumatic event for them, and that's really the one and only traumatic event they've experienced, also see it as a way to help them be kind, be gentle, take care of them, take care of yourself. Responding to challenging behavior from a trauma-informed practice requires you to reframe your response to, instead of "this kid is driving me nuts," to "how can I support him or her?" Reinforce their efforts to self-regulate. Respond consistently, because children who've been traumatized see consistency as safety. And your consequences should be connected to the problem or the behavior, immediate, not withdrawn out. Don't wait, just wait until, and given with empathy and not in anger. And it's important to respect personal space. As I mentioned, sometimes coming too close to a child can trigger a traumatic response. The importance of nonverbal communication can't be overemphasized. We all have a sense of personal space, and it's important to respect this with all children, but especially children who've experienced trauma. Too close and you're threatening. Too far and you don't care. In addition, the L stance, which is pictured in this slide, can be far more comforting than standing fully head-on, which can be interpreted as confrontational. Children who've experienced trauma are especially sensitive to body language, facial expressions, and gestures. Without realizing it, your physical response might remind them of a traumatic event that may be triggered by it. Try to keep a calm demeanor and a soft voice in a difficult situation. It can also help to mirror them without mimicking or ridiculing their physical stance, tone of voice, and facial expression, so that you are literally starting where they are at and then slowly guiding them to a more relaxed position, softer tone of voice, and less stressed facial expression. Keep your hands at your side, which is a very important aspect of your physical presence for children who have experienced domestic violence. In summary, when working with children, with all children, especially children who experience trauma, continuous and nurturing caregiving will support brain development by fostering psychological safety. The experience of psychological safety reduces the need to be engaged in constant vigilance, enabling children to make the most of that learning and developmental opportunities that you're providing. When you tolerate trauma-related emotions, children learn that it's safe to express these emotions, which can lead to improvements in self-control. Never forget the importance of positive role modeling, a means by which children can learn socially acceptable ways to experience emotions. Children are watching you all the time and often learn more by what they see than what you say. And just to quote our book, research on both the brain and behavior shows that nurturing and stable relationships with adults are essential for young children. This means that you may have an unparalleled opportunity to make a difference in children's lives. As I mentioned, I would like to provide some resources so that you can dig deeper into this. And these are some of the resources that I used to prepare this webinar. So I hope you will take a look and see how it can help you understand what you're going through, what the children are going through, and your role when everything gets back to what we consider normal. So thank you and stay safe.
So thank you so much, Barbara. I really appreciate that. It was a very comprehensive and exciting, helpful presentation. I really appreciate it. I don't usually do this, but as you were talking, I realized there were a few key points. I just want to, summarize really carefully for people, just a few things you can do based on everything that Barbara just said, some take for these challenging times. So being close by is really a key thing. It doesn't matter that you don't have to don't hover, but be in the same proximity of the children, be responsive as you can. This is for parents and for teachers. So I know many of you who work with children also are parents. So these are things that you can think about both in your classroom and at home. So just being available is really something that you should be thinking about now. Keeping a consistent routine, and also just as you might in a classroom, you have a classroom schedule that you follow all the time. If you're at home with children, your children, maybe you use that same strategy if you haven't already, and just being consistent as much as you can. That safety, that ability to for children to anticipate what's next, look forward to things, that is just so important. Keeping children engaged, sometimes with you, sometimes engaged with other things they can do at home is important. So you might have to put a little bit more effort into thinking about that. In my neighborhood, a parent decided that she wanted to take her child on a teddy bear walk. They were going on a scavenger hunt. So she reached out to the neighbors and asked all the neighbors to put teddy bears in a certain window of their room, knowing that not everybody would, some would, some wouldn't. So her child she's going to walk around the neighborhood and help her child and look for teddy bears, which I thought was a great solution and something different and out of the box. So things like that, keeping children engaged, being more patient than usual. I mean, patience and all of these things are key every day, but especially now, being a little bit more patient. And and viewing behavior through this trauma lens that Barbara's provided you with, and staying warm as possible, finding time for cuddles and stories and personal interactions is really key. One thing that's often overlooked is just being optimistic and helping children think about the positives and finding positives about every situation. There's a great book by Laura Kolker and Derry Korolek, two of my good friends, about optimism in early childhood, and it's awesome. And I hope you will look for it. It's called Making Lemonade, so I hope you'll look for that. And finally, modeling, as Barbara mentioned right at the very end, modeling positive warmth and patience and all these things we just talked about is really important. So think about how you are responding as well. So that's just my few key takeaways. One more thing Barbara mentioned that I found so important is taking a moment to find something uplifting and for your own self-care. And I've come across since this particular challenging time, a really awesome dog. I'm sure some of you have found him already. His name is Pluto, and he offers great advice. He had a really great one on the coronavirus response, and they're fantastic. These videos are hilarious. And I just noticed on NPR, there was a, I'm sorry, was it NPR? Yes, NPR online did a whole story about the woman who is behind these videos and her approach, but you can find Pluto living on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. I was going to play one for you today, but due to technical difficulties, I couldn't play it for you. It's really wonderful, uplifting. Some of the comments that the woman behind Pluto made was that many medical professionals, a lot of the comments she gets are from medical professionals who are looking forward every day to their Pluto video, which I do too. I track Pluto, and he keeps me really happy every day. So you might want to check that out. It's keeping me entertained during this tough time. So I just want to let you know that the certificate and door prizes, I mean, no door prize today. The certificate is coming up soon. It's on the last slide, but we have a few more things to get through. So first of all, I don't know if you know this, but free webinars just don't happen. They come about as a result of collaboration with some wonderful people who are very generous with both their time and their financial support of our series. We couldn't do this without our experts like Barbara, and Barbara has been so gracious, especially today, re-recording this webinar. And also, we couldn't do it without the financial support of our sponsors. And now, and so we're pleased to have Continued as our sponsor today. And I want to thank Jessica again for coming back for this re-record. We really appreciate it. So Jessica, I'd like to give you a moment to talk about Continued. So take it away.
Hey, excellent. So I thank you for the opportunity, and I'm happy to come back today. I know I was saddened to have the technical difficulties and not being able to hear the end. So it was wonderful to hear it again today. So those of you listening again, I hope you are enjoying it. But thank you for the opportunity, Fran, to be able to sponsor this course. And I'm very excited to tell all of you about our company, which is Continued. And we have been offering online continuing education since 1999. Our family of professions includes early childhood education, audiology, speech language pathology, occupational therapy, and physical therapy. So if you know someone in one of these other professions, we do offer online continuing ed for them. We now offer early childhood providers more than 200 practical research-based online courses presented by leading experts. Our courses are offered in video, audio, and text formats to meet your learning needs. Courses can be viewed on your computer, your tablet, and even your smartphone. Membership gives you 24/7 access to fit your busy schedule or your schedule that's a little more relaxed as of right now with the whole COVID and everything that's shut down. Continued is an ISET provider of CEUs. Our courses satisfy professional development requirements for state registries and childcare licensing in most states. A Continued membership gives you full access to all of our early childhood education courses for 1 year. Discounted group rates are also available. We offer courses in important ECE topic areas, including challenging behavior, STEM, and these other topic areas. Our courses, as I said before, are presented by leading experts, including these popular presenters, and you will see that Barbara Kaiser is one of our expert presenters. So if you enjoyed this course today by her, there are several others by Barbara on our site as well. I'd also like to take this opportunity to let you know about 2 courses in our library related to current events. We have partnered with Region 9 Head Start Association's Training West to bring you 2 courses related to COVID-19 and working with children and families during this time. The courses are Early Childhood Leaders Managing the Stress of Working in Response to COVID-19 and Emergency Response Strategies to Support Young Children and Families during COVID-19. If you are already a member of Continued ECE, these courses are in the library and are included with your membership. If you are not a member but would like to take these courses, please use the promo code FREESUPPORT in all caps to take these courses for free, and CEUs will be included. This offer is valid for these 2 courses only. We are also excited to announce that we now offer courses to help you earn the 120 required clock hours that you need to apply for your CDA credential. Your Continued Early Childhood Education membership gives you access to the entire course library, including courses for your CDA credential, all for $99 per year. CDA renewal courses are also available at no additional cost. We invite you to visit our site, browse our course library, and take a free course by using promo code ONEFREECOURSE at checkout. We're confident that your free course will provide you practical information that you can apply in the valuable work that you do every day. We hope that you decide to become a member of our learning community. If you are interested in group discounts, please reach out to Wendy Bradbury, and her information is here on the slide. Thank you so much for your time and attention. Everyone have a great day.
Great. Thank you so much, Jessica. I just want to encourage you to go to continued.com/ECE free course ECI. Okay, so definitely follow lead and go to Continued, and it'll be great. So you can follow up with any of the webinars, any of the presentations that Continued offers. I just also want to mention just my personal endorsement. I don't usually do this during webinars, but I do a lot of reviewing of online professional development, and I have never been as impressed with any company that offers online learning for early childhood. I just started to join the early childhood space a couple of years ago, and when I found it, I was just absolutely blown away. So the first thing I did was reach out to the CEO and have a conversation about bringing Continued on as a sponsor. Really, the offerings are fantastic. It's well organized. It's easy to find what you're looking for, and the courses are amazing. So I really heartily endorse Continued. And that's unusual because I never do that. Okay. I just want to let you know that you can, you may have come upon this webinar without knowing anything about who we are. We've been providing free conference quality webinars since 2010. Everything, all of our recordings are available 24/7, 365. We do offer 2 to 4 webinars per month, typically on Wednesdays, sometimes on Thursdays or other days. All of our live webinars can be found on our site at ecewebinars.com/register, and our recorded webinars can be found at ecewebinars.com/recordings. Now that page also includes the slides and handouts from every webinar, so you can find the materials from this recording there as well, and supporting materials, especially those resources that Barbara mentioned. You'll want to look those up. So just want to let you know we also offer another free service, which is eceexperts.com. It's Early Childhood Investigations Consultants Directory. So if you're looking for experts to come to your site and provide professional development, or you need other things like a website or other consultants to help, we have attorneys and other organizations on there, web designers, graphic designers, photographers, as well as a lot of early childhood experts on the site. It's eceexperts.com, and it's free for you to search. So as I said, clients can search for free and consultants subscribe annually. So I hope you'll take a look at this great resource. I just want to let you know we do offer optional CEUs. In addition to the certificates, you can apply for continuing education units from the Center for Early Childhood Professional Development at the University of Oklahoma. You can find the instructions about how to do that at ecewebinars.com, CEUS. That's capital C, capital E, capital U, lowercase s. Okay. Also, we offer a professional development reflections form, which we believe is extremely important to use during any professional development experience. We've designed the form to help you how to plan how to use the resources you learn in every one of our sessions, to apply what your knowledge in the classroom, and to think about what you need to make that happen. It's a great practice to reflect on your experiences or reflect about everything you do every day. But this form is required for CEUs. You can get that form at ecewebinars.com/reflect. So now I'd like your attention. I hope you can pay attention to the following slides. It's pretty important if you'd like to get a certificate. We do really admire you. We respect you, but we can't reply to emails about certificates. So you can do this, I promise. If you need additional support, you can find the information at, again, ecewebinars.com/certificates. So here's what you need to know. To get your certificate, you will write down the following link and then enter it into your browser, not into Google, into the field on your browser to download your certificate. So that would be Chrome, Firefox, Internet Explorer, whatever you use to visit websites, that's what you will use, and you enter that into the field where you type in an address. So all you have to do is write down the following link, ecewebinars.com/trauma. ecewebinars.com/trauma. Okay, so Barbara, thank you again so much. Really appreciate it. And also thank you so much, Jessica. It's been great to have you, and we really appreciate continued support. So thank you so much to everybody. If I could find it, I would turn. There we go. Okay. Thanks so much, everyone. Take care. Have a great day, and please stay safe and healthy.